Thank you. Fine, and you?
Very clearly.
Here it is 37 degrees. It's a hot August summer. Good to see you again.
See you, good to see you. 42 here in Amman, Jordan. 42. Amman, Jordan.
So, Dr. Kiran, I think we can start now. Yep. Okay, just give me 1 second. Can you see my slides?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, excellent. So, welcome everyone from different parts of the world. It's a great pleasure to be talking to all of you regarding a subject that's pretty close to our hearts. And before I begin, I should acknowledge Taleb, under whose guidance actually a long time ago, we did this project on Buddhist tourism in Asia. And thank you, Reza, for allowing us to have this conversation across the globe, facilitating this webinar. We've got 6 speakers, including myself. I would be giving a very quick overview of Buddhist heritage in Asia, and then we'll have speakers talking about different countries, country-specific areas on Buddhist heritage. So very quickly, let me say that this presentation, today's presentation that I'm giving to you is based on a work that we did in 2018-19, which was the first study of its kind comparing heritage across Asian subcontinent. We had 16 countries, and we looked at what each country has to offer, because Buddhism started in kind of Indian subcontinent, but it spread across the world, but primarily still dominated into the Asian subcontinent. So most of our conversations today are going to be from that. This is something that I love to use all the time. This is something that I picked up in Thailand, same, but different. But the best way to look at, to find this is in actually Buddhist places of worship. So this is a picture from Lumbini, where you have the birthplace of Buddha, where you get followers of Buddhism from all over the world coming and practicing their faith of Buddhism. So with that, I want to quickly talk about how Buddhism has spread into the Asian subcontinent, with Thailand having probably almost 95% of its population as practicing Buddhists, followed by Cambodia, Burma, and all of that. What is interesting to note here is that although Buddhism is practiced a lot there, but most of the sites related to Buddha, the historic Buddha, are actually in India and Nepal. And that makes it very kind of a complex. The complexity of Buddhist heritage comes from the fact that you have the foundations of the religion and the religious heritage in a certain place, but it's moved on to different parts, traveled over centuries, and therefore it became indigenized in a way, assimilated into the local populations, and generated different forms of cultural heritage. And that is what makes Buddhism and Buddhist heritage such a fascinating area for tourists and curiosity. So some of the things is that some of the festivals are very common in Buddhism that are celebrated all across Asia. And most of the lived practice of Buddhism is around with Buddhist monks, the Sangha, and the temple, the Wat. It's called by different names. So what is interesting is, while we have got all these Buddhist places and lived practices in different countries in Asia, most of them come to India for the footsteps of Buddha, as they call it, for the pilgrimage to footsteps of Buddha, where there are 4 major places, Bodh Gaya, Lumbini, Kushinagar, and Sarnath, where Buddha had performed all his major events of his life. So pilgrims all over the world come to India. So I'm going to quickly talk about what is the kind of heritage that is available and that's present right now. Because when we were talking about this session, we were thinking about how much specific should we go, or should we give a broader brushstroke view of what is available. So this is what we've done. In South Asia, you've got Bangladesh. There's different countries that are there. So I'm going to quickly glance through some of these main heritages that we talk about. So Bangladesh, for people's surprise, actually has a lot of Buddhist heritage, because it was a continuation of the Indian subcontinent. And after Bodh Gaya, there were disciples of Buddha who actually ventured in Bangladesh and then developed lots of monasteries and stupas there. There are at least 5 major sites, and 2 of them have been promoted by Asian Development Bank, UNESCO, many multinational agencies to promote Buddhist tourism. However, there are low levels of tourism development. Bhutan, which is the most significant one. In fact, it is seen as the most significant living culture of Buddhism. And it is the government, the state, through its constitution, which talks about protecting the cultural heritage of Buddhist society. So it really has got that push from the state to look after the heritage. And it has zongs and monasteries and traditional houses. But the most important bit is they celebrate so many festivals, and that keeps that culture alive. And therefore, Bhutan is now emerging as a major tourist destination, particularly from the Indian subcontinent. India, I already mentioned about this. There are large pilgrimage circuit of these 4 places, which during Buddha's lifetime itself was seen as the major areas for people to go and worship. But in many of my research publications, I've kind of argued that a pilgrimage is not necessarily, a circuit is not the best way to look at these Buddhist sites. They all individually and independently are really important places of tourism as well. Then Nepal, we talked about this. It's the birthplace of Buddha. But the most important bit with Nepal is that Lumbini, the main place, has got a sacred garden complex. It's been supported by the United Nations for almost 50 years now. And it is a place where international monasteries become very important, because in India and Nepal, what has been the Buddhism has evolved as a hybrid, where international Buddhist organizations have come in, developed monasteries, and then they have tried to enliven Buddhist practice. Pakistan also has some significant Buddhist heritage. There have been talks about having a pilgrimage heritage trail in Pakistan, but unfortunately, because of the political situations, there has been very limited engagement with Buddhist heritage in Pakistan. Sri Lanka, and I'll leave this to Amila, who will talk more about Sri Lanka, but Sri Lanka has more than 70% of its population as Buddhist. So we find a very good mix of active Buddhist religious practice and archaeological sites dedicated to Buddha. When we move to Southeast Asia, there are these 7 major countries that we studied, in which the most, I won't say most significant, but in terms of heritage, you've got Cambodia, which has got 4,000 plus temples and ancient sites. It's also one of the flagship areas for tourists. Generally, about in that year, we looked at about 6 million people, but most of them come to Siem Reap. So it's sometimes hard to distinguish between the Angkor Wat as a Hindu religious place and a Buddhist religious place. In fact, this is a common feature of Buddhist heritage. It's what we call syncretic with Hindu sites. So Hindu sites also have Buddhist sites, because Buddhism was a layer of religious heritage that emerged out of Hindu practices in the past, the Brahminical practices. I don't want to go into the details of it, but generally speaking, what we see is in Southeast Asia, it became much more indigenized. It became assimilated into the local practice. So you have the pinned apart kind of practices where monks would go to local villages and spread Buddhism. So in Indonesia, Borobudur and Prambanan are the two most important sites for Buddhist visitors. Laopedia, probably Reza is right now enjoying that Laos hospitality or probably heritage in Laos. Again, the challenge with Laos is its initial low base of tourism, but increasingly we are seeing lots of sites are promoting Buddhist heritage for tourism purposes, because that's a very, very important tourism product. Myanmar is known as land of pagodas. Again, very important place for Buddhists, particularly pilgrims, not so much of tourists because of the military rule and everything. So here you find a lot of movement of monks in Myanmar, more than the other tourists. Then, of course, Thailand, and I'll let Brooke talk a lot more about Thailand because I don't want to take away anything. But amongst all the places that we have, it's actually Thailand that attracts the largest cohort of Buddhist tourists, almost 35 million a year. Not all of them are Buddhists. They're tourists first, and then there are some who also are interested in Buddhism. But there is a whole packaging that goes together. The key feature is that Buddhism is embedded into the local lifestyle, and that makes it really important for local tourists to come in and enjoy, or probably engage, enjoy is not the word, engage with different facets of Buddhism. Vietnam, again, I'll leave Professor Tham to talk more about it, but it also has a very significant Buddhist heritage that is now being, after many, many years of dormancy, is coming into fore. Very quickly, again, China, I will leave it to Professor Hung, but that was the purpose of getting that cross-section from Asia to talk about it. But we have been increasingly seeing real good numbers of tourists into many different Buddhist sites, particularly around the 4 holy mountains, and then the 4 major grottos that are there. There's a lot of technological advancement that we see in China with regards to these sites, and therefore the heritage is much more widely known. Also, one thing to remember, China, with all things, they always want to go for the bigger, better. So in the last 20 years, we have seen some of the largest idols or monuments dedicated to Buddha and different versions of Buddha being erected. Japan, there is a fair amount of literature on the Japanese pilgrimages, but more than the shrines is actually the pilgrimage routes in Japan that are really more important compared to the sites. And therefore, it gets embedded alongside walking trails and nature and adventure tourism kind of thing. So Buddhist heritage lends itself to a much wider process of touristic activities. South Korea, I'll leave this to Jain to talk more about it. But again, like Japan, you have a very big pilgrimage trail, about 1,500 kilometers long, that is being developed, slow and steady, more recognition to the traditional religion. The Temple Stay program of South Korea has become one of the most iconic programs that we have seen. So if I have to kind of quickly highlight some of the key patterns that we see, one is in South Asia, particularly, you have a large, in fact, foreign visitors is negligible, less than 10%. But when it comes to Southeast Asian countries, you've got more foreign visitors compared to the domestic visitors. And that tells us a little bit about how we should engage with Buddhist heritage. This level of development also influences domestic tourism. Probably Laos, PDR, and Cambodia are fairly recent into the party of tourism, let's say, and they are developing their own domestic tourist market, but most importantly, they are being visited by the foreign tourists. So how do we really package these products, make the heritage more meaningful in these places? That's a concern. The other thing to remember is there's a lot of regional flow within, so this is what I like to call traveling neighbors. So because it's a part of one larger subcontinent, you see, even though the countries have their own sovereignties and everything put together, you have people who are crossing the borders on a regular basis. And one of the reasons is that there is a religious and cultural side to it. There's a cultural dimension to it, that they follow Buddhism. So there is a fair amount of travel happening at that local level or regional level. There are some numbers here, don't worry about those. To conclude, we have similar and shared heritage, but there are different approaches to its promotion and management. So, for example, India, Nepal, there are more archaeological sites. So the focus is on preservation and conservation of those sites. Whereas in Thailand, it's more actively promoted as a tourism product. There's a lot of cultural diplomacy that goes around with Buddhist heritage. In fact, many countries have these bilateral agreements where they allow Buddhist tourists to come and develop infrastructure. There is a lot of potential to enhance regional tourism experience. And that's where I have finished my 15 minutes. Thank you very much for your time and listening to me. That there are some details for me if you want to get in touch with me. Thank you. Now, we will take questions. If you want, you can put your questions in the chat box, and we will answer those after we all have presented our sessions. Thank you. Amila, would you like to go next?
Yes, Robert. Can you see my screen, sir?
All good.
Okay. May I start, sir? Okay. Ivan, may you live long. That my topic is Sri Lankan Buddhist festivals and rituals as tourism events and products. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Sinde for inviting me to deliver this speech. The scope varies from large Buddhist festivals to small rituals. As you know, Sri Lanka is the center of Theravada Buddhism with thousands of monasteries, and 70% of the population are Buddhists, and 4 out of these 6 cultural World Heritage Sites of the island are Buddhist sites. And there is a rich heritage of Buddhist festivals and the rituals with a fair level of authenticity makes it a valuable tourism asset for domestic and international tourism. Some of those carry high potential to be designated as UNESCO intangible cultural heritage properties. That the Perahera culture, that is the culture of the Buddhist processions in Sri Lanka, can be given as an example. Here I am expecting to discuss about the importance of the Sri Lankan Buddhist festivals and the rituals in tourism, and also that I would like to put some insight to develop more meaningful and sustainable Buddhist tourism related with the events. In broader sense, irrespective of the number, size, or frequency, I see a Sri Lankan Buddhist heritage event in 3 contexts. The first one is in Sri Lanka, that all around the island, there are Buddhist festivals. Then the second context is the Sri Lankan diaspora and the Sri Lankan Buddhist diaspora and Sri Lankan citizens in abroad. They organize some Buddhist festivals in foreign countries. The third context is most of the times small events are organized as a tourism product for outbound Sri Lankan pilgrim tourists, especially in India and Nepal. the Sri Lankan Buddhist pilgrims, they want to live in a kind of a Sri Lankan pilgrim tourist bubble during their journey to India and Nepal. Then the home country events and the rituals are part of this particular bubble. And from an event tourism perspective, that Sri Lankan outbound Buddhist tourism pilgrim packages to India and Nepal can be divided into 3 categories. The first one is general pilgrim tour packages with some rituals and small events. The second one is special event or festival packages such as Katino Vesak packages at a specific sacred site. And the third one is combined packages of round tour and festival experiences. That the example is the Katina plus round tour at the Buddhist circuit. And the sermons, sound offerings, and the medicine offering, Kapruko Kanchuka Puja offering, or that observing precepts, meditation, or some other rituals may be part of those Buddhist tourism packages. There are a number of important Buddhist festivals and events for tourism in Sri Lanka. You know that the Vesak is organized to celebrate the birth, enlightenment, and the demise of Lord Buddha. It is a shared festival heritage among the Buddhist countries. It is organized in Sri Lanka with some local identities. That it comprises from some colorful decorations such as that pandols, lanterns, and also spiritual practices such as the meditation and also dansal, or that free foods for the people. And the Posoni is a Sri Lankan heritage Buddhist festival. It is organized to celebrate the introduction of Buddhism to the island in 3rd century BC. It has a number of components of the Vesak, but it has its own unique identity as well. Then that the Asala festival in Kandy is the most important Buddhist festival in the island in tourism. It is the annual festival of the sacred temple of Tooth in Kandy. It has thousands of years all continuous tradition, and also there are lots of traditional performing arts. My background, you see that the performing dance of that Perahara, day Perahara or day position. And even tonight, the event is going on. You can watch live streaming. And then that Durutu Perahara of the Kalaniya Monastery and the Navan Perahara of the Gangara Monastery can be, those are 2 major processions in Sri Lanka. And the Katina festival is a kind of a shared heritage with other Buddhist countries. That the Katina festivals with the processions are organized all around the country in Sri Lanka. It is considered as the most meritorious events for the contributors by Sinhala Buddhists, Sri Lankan Buddhists. And the full night chanting with these specific rituals and the nice traditional decorations are another important events. There are a number of other rituals and events like that Teva, or the daily routine ritual of the Temple of Tooth, and also that the Kanchuka Puja. You can see at the top right image that Kanchuka Puja is performed. And this is the bottom left side. You can see that the Pirit Pavilion. And there are some specific flower festivals. The Jasmine Flower Festival attracts thousands of domestic tourists. That alms givings, Bodhi Puja, sound offering, light offering, offering of foods and drinks. And there are a number of combined events as well. At the Buddhist events and the rituals in Sri Lanka, I think we can recognize mainly 5 types of tourists. The first type is Buddhist pilgrims. Those may be hardcore Buddhist tourists. The second type is that other Buddhist religious tourists. and spiritual tourists may be there, and also non-religious cultural tourists and spectators. At the left hand image, those people are Buddhist pilgrims. That the right side image, it seems the majority of the people should be spectators. Then Sri Lanka has large number of monasteries and hermitages provide meditation opportunities for these spiritual tourists with some temple stay, but not very popular in Sri Lanka. Some places actually following that Buddhist philosophy, and some may not consider to market this as a tourism product as well. There are numbers of places providing non-commercialized products. But there are a number of initiatives to develop Buddhist tourism in Sri Lanka. That International Buddhist Tourism Center was established at Riddhi Vihara, Punagala, and also that the NTO, National Tourism Organization of the country, sometimes promote specific events for tourism. And I see three categories of Buddhist event tourism packages in Sri Lanka. The first one is Buddhist tours with opportunity to attend selected rituals or events. The second one is short event excursion tours for 2 to 4 hours generally, that a kind of a Colombo city tour to witness Vesak is an example. And the third one is Buddhist or leisure tour packages with witnessing an event. Most of the times, it may be, not all the times, a kind of a Buddhist procession. In the context of the Buddhist event tourism in Sri Lanka, the domestic tourists visit to Buddhist sacred sites, either attend a festival or conduct their own special ritual or a small event. That may be the events such as the Kanchuka Puja, that is very popular in these days in coastal Sri Lanka. And some hotels, they celebrate certain festivals such as Vesak or Poson with some decorations, and they conduct lantern competitions for their employees. But major Buddhist festivals attract large number of domestic and international tourists. Some of those make the peak tourist season of that particular destination area. There is an increased demand and income for tourism business, including that the supplement at hotels in certain cases, even a seat at a viewing gallery for Temple of Tooth Possession generate $50 to $125 per day. And the generation of income for local economies and the creation of income opportunities for locals and the preservation of intangible heritage, cultural heritage is important benefits. And the events provide an opportunity to connect with Buddhist teaching. That is very, very important. And another very crucial thing is that events are serving as a kind of opportunity for community building and the creation and the recreation of the heritage. My current research is going on that heritageization of events and the role of tourism and events in this heritageization process in Sri Lanka. And when we consider for the development of more meaningful, sustainable Buddhist event tourism, that there are a number of things we can consider. That one major thing we need to consider is the identification of related specific interest tourism niche markets, and the designing products for their appeals is very important. And also that it is possible to design Buddhist event tourism packages with combination of related cultural experiences such as that volunteering at events and creative tourism experiences, and also that elephant volunteering, because elephants are related with major festivals. And this image is from a homestay in rural Sri Lanka, that you can see the young Western tourists are worshipping to the father of the host, father of the host during New Year festival. What I want to say actually that there is a growing number of tourists, that's a niche market, growing number of tourists, they want to live like locals, even live like a family member during their stay. Then we can develop some opportunities to celebrate an event with local family at a home stay. The main focus to develop the products should be around non-major event, because that there is over tourism issue with that the other events. And also that addressing the invisible burdens is kind of a challenge in Sri Lanka because cultural sensitivity, but we need to come out with some kind of creative solutions with Buddhist teachings and Buddhist philosophy as well. And also we need to consider about that authenticity, religious sensitivity, and the development of Buddhist pilgrim packages for specific target tourism markets. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amila, for this very fascinating presentation and following the time. So I'm also not going to speak much. We have Brooke coming up next. So, but till the time, Amila, can you stop sharing the screen?
Yes, sir. Yes,
thank you. Yeah, the way we've just organized this is, I was talking to our speakers. As Buddhism spread through Indian heartland towards eastern part of Asia, accordingly, our speakers will also be coming in with their presentations. So over to you, Brooke.
Okay, thank you. Can everyone see my screen and hear me? Okay.
All good.
Great. And so thank you to the Institute of Tourism and to Kieran for inviting me to this event. I'm Brooke Shednick and I'm in a Department of Religious Studies. So I'm coming from that kind of angle, although I of course study tourism as well, but you will notice probably some Buddhist studies and religious studies in my talk as well. So it's titled From Meditation to Magic. This one we'll talk about like different kinds of tourism, the kind of the spectrum of Buddhist tourism in Thailand. And what I'm going to mainly be talking about is how Buddhism can conjure distinctive ideas and images for different groups of people, especially travelers to a majority Buddhist country like Thailand. And I'm going to discuss 3 different modes of Buddhist tourism: the like meditation tourism, more magical kinds of tourism, and tourism to like mega statues, or sometimes they're called monumental statues or colossal statues. So this presentation will illuminate the varieties of Buddhist tourism in contemporary Thailand. And so if you're from Western countries and you think about Buddhism, you will most likely think about meditation. But if you are from Asian countries, you might first think about magic and protection. So this is from the perspective of many Buddhist monks in Thailand, as well as the Tourism Authority of Thailand, or the TAT. And so these assumptions are the basis for the activities that are advertised targeting these groups of international tourists. But what about domestic tourists? Buddhist temples become popular with domestic tourists for many different reasons, but one reason we can look at is because of mega statues, and not just mega statues of the Buddha, although these can also be very popular, but there's a recent trend in creating mega statues that sees temple abbots interested in building something new yet familiar, religious figures from outside of Thai Buddhism, but not too far. So sacred beings from Mahayana Buddhism in China and Japan are becoming popular. And while Thai tourists are focused on religious resources from East Asia and Thailand, there's East Asian tourists, especially Chinese, that are looking for authentic Thai magical powers. And at the same time, Western tourists are often kind of shielded from any kind of magical or popular form of Buddhism, and are being promoted a more rational, logical, and more modern side of Buddhism, focused on the practice of meditation and the doctrines of the Buddha. So along with Buddhist studies scholars, Elizabeth Williams-Orberg and Anne Glegg, and you can see their names here. We published an article in Religions, and in that article, we identified the ways that Buddhist teachers appeal to specific audiences. And we did this research in the tourist center of Leh, Ladakh in India, and found that monks presented Buddhism with both scientific and then also magical elements for different audiences. And in this article, we focused on multiple Buddhisms, or the multiplicity of Buddhism that's used to attract, for the purpose of monks, used to attract kind of practitioners, but for tourism purposes, then used to attract different kinds of tourist markets. So in this paper, I'll focus on this multiplicity as a way to understand the varying snapshots of Buddhism seen in religious tourism in Thailand. So the first is meditation tourism, and for monks involved in monastic education, especially those on the English language track, teaching meditation to foreigners is a significant part of their outreach. So the monks at the Buddhist University at Wat Suandak, it's called Mahachulalongkorn Rajavidyalaya Buddhist University. And so I'm just going to say MCU for short. And they held a mini workshop recently on English skills development for propagating Buddhism and teaching Buddhism to foreigners, just in late July of this year at their International Meditation Center. And student monks have been involved with teaching meditation and talking with foreigners about the monastic life in Buddhism at MCU since 2000. So the International Meditation Center that they have was established so that those interested in meditation or Buddhism who know English can get a chance to try out this practice, and it's taught by monks that are specialized and trained in speaking to foreigners. And this kind of meditation tourism is geared towards Westerners with a modern view of Buddhism. And this modern view sees Buddhism as a tool for the mind, a scientific and logical practice rather than a religion. A modern Western view of Buddhism is assumed for all the tourists who come to learn and practice meditation. And I researched this in my previous book, Religious Tourism in Northern Thailand, about how student monks were used to speaking with, Westerners, and they prefer the kind of understanding that usually comes along with Western tourists because it aligns with the monastic education that they receive at MCU. Particularly Westerners in Thailand are thought to embody the modern, and they represent the opportunity to practice the global language of English. So the student monks that I have interviewed all agreed that Westerners are the majority of international tourists who take part in their meditation retreat program. And both groups were aligned in their preference for discussions of Buddhist doctrine and meditation, as opposed to more protective and magical elements of Buddhism. So there are very different assumptions about Buddhism as part of Chinese tourism as it's promoted to Chinese tourists in Thailand. And so instead of Buddhism as a rational tradition, which can be explained in English by student monks as a practice of taming the mind in meditation, the Tourism Authority of Thailand promotes magical or mutelu tourism for Chinese people. So mutelu means it's related to belief, mystery, talismans, fortune cards, strengthening luck and destiny. And mutelu is a fusion of Buddhism, Brahmanism, Hinduism, and animism, and gives practitioners aid in everyday life concerns like work and finances and love. And the origin of the word mutelu, it comes from an Indonesian horror film with that title that's from 1979. And that movie is a story about two young women who pursue the same man, and they use black magic to make the young man fall in love with them. But today, the word mutelu in Thai is not used to refer to black magic, but to the use of amulets and bracelets and stones and other good luck items to boost one's fortune. And this is big business among Thai people, especially when celebrities and influencers go on social media and show their worship that help them to reach success. So instead of rationality, it's faith that's used, that's the tool they used to drive tourism for the Chinese market share of Buddhist tourism. And the Bangkok Post reports that the TAT has been promoting mutelu tourism in northeastern Thailand since 2020. And they do that for both domestic and Chinese tourists because they believe that both these groups share similar ideas and beliefs, and they call it faith tourism. And they have faith tourism programs that are increasing beyond the Northeast and that they hope will encourage tourists to stay for longer periods. So each region now from the TAT has Chinese superstition tourism routes. That's the word that the TAT uses. I wouldn't use the word superstition myself. And they had also a special event at Central World that was called the Amazing Mutiverse. And this was a fair that was held to showcase the spiritual roots and tour packages and religious ceremonies and attractions throughout Thailand, and display products and artwork that was related to Mutelu, that includes Hindu gods and fortune-telling services. So although Thai Buddhists are part of Mutelu tourism, I'm going to focus on something different for the domestic tourists that I think is also interesting, which is the mega statues. And these are extra large statues that are popular attractions that can be part of a temple complex or exist independently as a site of worship. The effect and importance of mega statues is meant, like the reason for building them is meant to spread Buddhism and curiosity about the teachings, and visitors arrive at the space in order to revel at its enormity and the effort it must have taken to create such a large object. And I highlight this a little bit in my book. I'll just take this moment to promote my new book. It's Living Theravada at the bottom of the screen there. It's a kind of introduction to live Theravada Buddhism. So these mega statues must be something new and exciting for the domestic audience, something they've not seen before, but also a religious figure that is within their orbit of familiarity. So imported religious figures from India and China work well for this because they've been part of the Theravada Buddhist complex for centuries. And so, for example, the large reclining statue of Ganesh at Wat Samam Ratanaram has attracted significant numbers of tourists each year, which has positively impacted several businesses in the area. And I'm gonna, for two examples from Mahayana Buddhism, I'm first gonna introduce a mega statue of Guanyin or Guanyin. And this was built in the early 2000s by the abbot of Wat Hoi Plakang. And it's located in Chiang Rai, which is in northern Thailand. And so Guanyin is already an important figure within Theravada Buddhism, although originating from China and, before that, India. But it has entered into Thai Buddhism through her role as a goddess of compassion, or sometimes they call her the goddess of mercy here in English. This is the largest Guanyin statue in Thailand, and it has a height of about 79 meters, and it's located on a hill, and visitors can take an open air bus for free to view the statue, and it costs a little over $1 in US dollars to go inside the statue and see the view through the eye of Guanyin on the 25th floor. So Wat Hoi Plakang was an abandoned temple, and the local people had faith in the monk that's named Luangpa Pokchok after he spent one rainy season, like about 3 months, in a nearby temple. And because of this, the people of the community asked this monk to live in their village and restore the temple there and become the first abbot. And he agreed, and he turned the temple into one of the famous tourist attractions in Chiang Rai today. So the second example is the mega statue of the Kamakura Buddha called Daibutsu, which is a famous Buddha statue in Kamakura, Japan. And this statue is located at Wat Doi Pratan in Lampang province, which is also in northern Thailand. And so the origin of this statue is this. One night in 2013, the abbot of this temple now, Praajan Ponchoi Akawaso, he had a dream that the Kamakura Buddha from the Kotokuin temple in Japan flew in the sky and landed on top of the mountain Pratan, Doi Pratan, where he is, and said, "Please build me here. I will come to be here with you." And 1 year later, the abbot set out to build this great Buddha, and it was completed in 2021. This is a bronze statue that has a width of 14 meters, and it's also situated on top of a hill that makes it able to be seen from miles away. And visitors can take a short ride up the hill for less than $1 US, or they can walk up the stairway. And like the previous temple, This was also an abandoned temple without monks for many generations. The fact that these two abbots from the Daibutsu and the Guanyin could take these abandoned temples and turn them into attractions with hundreds of visitors per day. I mean, I've been there recently. It was it translates for Thai Buddhists to mean that these monks have a large store of merit and barami, or that they have like a religious currency, they have a lot of morality, charisma that's needed to build these monumental statues successfully. So that also is part of the attraction for Thai Buddhists, that they want to be in contact with that kind of power, spiritual power that these abbots have. And although the Daibutsu has a religious purpose that stems from the dream and is connected with faith in the abbot and his ability to complete the statue, at the same time, the statue also is meant to make Thai people feel like they're in Japan. And in Thailand, people really admire Japan and think of it as a modern Asian country. So that's like a happy feeling for them. So this is a significant part of the tourist attraction with the Japanese aesthetic that's all around the Daibutsu statue. There's like Torii, the gates, the red gates, and Totoro is around, and the beckoning cats and the bells to make wishes on. And it's similar to the popular religious practices that you might see at a Japanese Buddhist temple. So as we can, let me just move past this. As we can see from looking at magical and meditational aspects of Buddhism, as well as how mega statues play a role, especially in domestic tourism, Buddhism is a religion filled with multiplicity, and there's much to draw on for tourist attractions within Buddhism, from practice to rituals, to sacred objects, to paying respect to worthy figures, to finally just viewing the completion of such a massive undertaking as a mega statue. There's something within Buddhist tourism for those interested in the rational, modern seeming tradition, those more focused on the apotropaic or protective aspects of Buddhism used to prevent bad luck and create good luck. And for those looking for something new, a new spiritual resource to be in contact with, or just to view and feel like you've traveled to a modern Asian country like Japan. Thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Brooke. Again, a nice worldwide different view of what we don't generally see in Thai tourism when people think about only Bangkok. I think you've given us a very nice overview of what's happening in the countryside and across outside areas. Excellent. We move to Professor Tam. You're on mute, Professor Tam.
Yes, take a minute to share my slides, and that is the volumes. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah, we can hear you clearly. So from Thailand, we move to Vietnam now.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay, good evening, distinguished guests in friends, colleges. First of all, I would like to spread my special thanks to Dr. Karin Schrader and committee member for giving me this opportunity to share with you and to meet all of you here about talking about the Buddhist tourism. And let me just see how to deal with it. Okay, given a very limited time, about 15 minutes. So I would like to start my talk with a very brief introduction about the Vietnamese case, and overview of Vietnamese, Buddhism heritage. Then further detail in Buddhist tourism in Vietnam, talking about master niche a little bit off, but we can see how we investigate on this issue, and further leading to the commodification and commoditization issue. So conclusion, and then compared to, just rehearsed by this is the fourth presentation. We see down a little bit to our country, quite a different claim, talking about the Buddhist tourism here. Now, a brief introduction. We know already that is a very fast recovering form of tourism in general after shock of COVID-19. because of the demand factor and also the supply factor. We got improving of accessibility to the separate places and other pull factor also, I mean, like a marketing promotion. What I would like to say here is I would like to borrow the question that we can say the unanswered question what already raised in the first UNWTO Spiritual Tourism Conference organized in 2013 in Ninh Binh province in Vietnam. What we talk about that is what exactly are we sustaining and developing within the spiritual tourism market niche. So making on the, I mean, first we would like to have some review on the history of, I think on this one, some missing. Okay, anyway. History of the Buddhism in Vietnam. I mean, Buddhism was introduced to Vietnam directly from India in early AD periods. And according to the, I don't know how it can, it's okay. To the Encyclopedia of Viet History, we know that during this time, Vietnam under the Northern Dominionic period. So that's why culture in general and Buddhism in particular have been influenced by Confucianism and Taoism from China. And Buddhism in Vietnam had two major sects that you already very familiar, that is Hinayana and Mahayana sects. And these sects divided into too many sects and schools. And each sect or school has their own philosophy of distinct concept, culture, practices. Buddhism in Vietnam has one thing in common that is based on the moralities of confessions and filial piety, leading the people to rational goods. So that's why we say that Buddhist heritage is a living culture and a very huge or very invaluable heritage in Vietnam, going along with the process of building and defending the country over the thousands of the years of histories. And Buddhism in Vietnam is have a large number of believers. We see the first presentation from Dr. Schinder saying that, according to the global data or something like that, said about more than 50% of Vietnamese people follow the Buddhism. But here in reality, that also mentioned in 2015 that means the former chairman of VNAT Vietnam, Vietnam Administration of Tourism. So we have a very, Buddhism in Vietnam has very large number of believers, about more than 90% of population practicing one form or another of the religions. And Buddhism influence, have very strong influence on the conception, culture, and the way of life of the Vietnamese people and on social status. So going with that, we have tangible heritage. You have no time to talk about it, but we just see the very impressive number of the what we call the pagoda and temple in 2007. We have about more than 14,700 pagoda in the whole country, but it increased in about more than 18,000 and almost 18,500 pagoda and temple in 2020. And many of the Asian temple pagoda dated back in century and a home of valuable artifacts and well preserved today. So also it's important to mention about the extended landscape of Buddhism heritage in Vietnam. It's huge and about hundreds of Buddhist related monuments that draw interest from the tourist, domestic and international. So we have here like a sanctuaries or tower, tombs, darknet sites, especially darknet sites. So on the going with the intangible value of the heritage, we just only have one saying that is the key value that is the cultural value that instilled to the Vietnamese daily lives over generations. So it associated with the Vietnamese daily life and what we embedded in culture, literature, arts, and many others activity in daily lives. So let's see some image. These are different pictures that image that show us how what is heritage and how the people practice the religion or spiritual practice in Vietnam. We see here different level, different scale, and different feature of in using the date, normal days or the festival, based festival. So we have quite a very impressive image during the time. Also, not only in country, but outside, like in Australia, French, US especially, we can find a long list of the Buddhist, Vietnamese Buddhist temple, pagoda. So we can say that the Buddhist heritage is always associated with the Vietnamese people daily lives, and not only church that, but on the virtual space, we also see how they share the common knowledge, beliefs, and practices of Buddhism. We see there like one very famous website which translate into 18 languages, more than 18 languages, and different kind of books, e-books, audio, video, whatever sharing, and even it is for the inland and abroad, so we can find it available. Now, again, with a very small, some other, two different picture, two different scenario. The two above is the normal day, the daily lives of two very famous pagoda in Vietnam. This one is we call Ba Vàng. Any Vietnamese people, if talk about Ba Vàng pagoda, the people know where it is. And also Yên Tử, that means very, very old pagoda in the northern province. This is normal day. And this is during the festival or during the, not necessarily during the festival. For example, this case is a festival, but in this case, it's a day, say like the mid, what we call full moon day. That means the mid of the month by lunar calendar or the beginning of the month. So two different pictures, how the people flood into, go into the kind of religious, or we can say the spiritual or secret sides for practicing their belief and religions. Now, again, too much for 2D. We don't stop, but we see all the church crowds. Also related to spiritual practices and especially related to Buddhism. Now, what would like to see from this? I would like to take marketing perspective to talk about what kind of product we would like to say here, at what scale, impact and the concern of sustainable development if we want to talk about, and we always mention about us, and also branding, because one of the benefits from the spiritual tourism in general and Buddhism tourism in particular, destination, especially in Vietnam, in every province and even local destination or national destination, we would like to take this heritage to make a very unique branding points, selling points. So how we can go a little bit more in the practice. And I told you already, at mentioned beginning, we know already that spiritual tourism is the niche market. That's true. And my room here is make on the further investigation of product level of Buddhist tourism. In order to better understanding what we mentioned earlier, what exactly are we sustaining and developing? So here I take the product level of the Buddhism Buddhist tourism product. We see core product, and it's on of our on the presentation, or I'll call it presentation, to talk about the spiritual practices, religious practices, or especially Buddhism festival event. On the thing you call core product, one of key core product, we see that I just say mass and slot niche, because here with some it common, very often this is just niche market, but during the peak time, even in the first conference, we want to just talk about the spiritual tourism that is a mass market. You see, it's because of what we just have seen in the image we just have seen. But it has some key attribute. It is a high seasonality, and ritual the key points then are important than the religious belief. So the activity here, and I no need to repeat because we already have talked about this already, but mainly for domestic people, domestic tourists and worship or participating in Buddhist festival. Now, along with that, we have sightseeing cultural tourism that we said, in the order is important. We say seeing cultural, sightseeing cultural tourism, you can say mass, because can say all, but most of this product is a commercialized because it's provided or commercialized by the travel agency. So its main purpose is just sightseeing, for curiosities, cultural and recreational pursuits. The same for retreat quest, yeah, for sure, that's a niche market, but mainly for spiritual, and we know already personal wellness. And they have third kind of the thing we already just listened to our presentations just at the beginning up to now. But one point here is a very common in Vietnam now is education. So it's also need market because mainly for the young people, but also commercialized by the travel agency or company, so that the little girl and boy or even student can learn from history, I mean Buddhism history and other kind of what we call ritual practices, or even the Zen yoga for personal wellness. And we talk about supplementing, facilitating, and augmenting product, which all just commercialized by different guys, I mean different suppliers. Like a logistic for the event, selling souvenir that we just heard about in previous presentation, and transportation. Only thing is that commercial line, and I say must because it provide in the way that it not standardized and in the flux up to the demands. So now the common issue with what I call that is a commoditization, a commodification. Commodification mean here is a very narrow term that is, I mean, with a narrow meaning that is product development. And commoditization, I would like, or commercialization, would like to talk the over commodification. So we see here the problem of product development, solely profit driven, less visitor satisfactions. And we have some kind of, I mean, from that I make some kind of, I mean, implicit policy implication and management implication related to product development, related to different market segment, related to visitor experience, and related to human resource events. And accessibility, for sure, it is a very easy to understand because we have looked up a very vast and very huge heritage that's located in a very remote place, but a very high valuable heritage. So to be involved in development, we have to have better accessibility. Low economic impact, I was talking about a little bit later, because we on church listen from Baruch presentation that we're talking about how much they pay, what kind of payments, but in general, that is a very low economic impacts. And in order to improve this, we have to improve the involvement from local people and destination marketing. So then we move on a little bit with the very big problem now, a very common saying, we say that over commodification of the spiritual value and Buddhism heritage, and this, the case of Vietnam is not exceptional. Like talking about superstition that Baruch said she doesn't want to say, but we said these are very common problems and other inappropriate practices. Also crowding, we see already pollution, harmful impact on the heritage. So only thing we need a very good, very well-managed plans or other issues related to institutional regulatory mechanism or for responsible Buddhist tourism developments. So now it's a very fast, but I have to come to conclusion anyways. Now, to summarize my talk, I could say that, okay, potential is there too much, and we're talking about opportunity on tone. So it's open for Buddhist tourism development in Vietnam. And also this recognized by Vietnam Tourism Development Strategy to 2020, saying that we use this as the very key selling points or key element to shape or shaping the unique need of the destination at different level, local level or national level. And what is reality here? We have the underdeveloped Buddhism tourism. For sure, you see above, I mean, especially in the picture or image, and then impact of Buddhist tourism in situ, local versus national. Maybe at national and local destination, they have some benefit from, I mean, tourism in the broader sense, but in situ, especially in situ and local, maybe is very limited, as I just talked before. And especially the concern of socio-economic environmental problem, we already talk about it very often, but it's a very serious problem with what? This is a very serious problem that with what we just see via the image already, for sure. And then the last, but very important, that we need for more integrated planning for more sustainable Buddhist tourism development in Vietnam. So coming with it, we said, if we just said, okay, Buddhist tourism in particular and spiritual tourism in general is a niche market. So then how to expand it, how to make it better? I mean, what about the scale? What should be developed or expanding? Or what to sustain? I just make a very beautiful flower. We say we have saying like a Buddhist heritage in the middle. So we try to take to try to sustain the three kind of like a very common form of tourism related to Buddhism heritage, that the pilgrimage, spiritual tourism, and religious tourism. But adding other which very important one, that wellness tourism. We have to transfer or translate on the values, Buddhist heritage into the wellness tourism, and at the intersection between two. And this is a very vast market and very potential market, and also very good for long-term sustainable development in strategy point of view. Also, we have educational tourism. So that's all for my presentation here. Thank you very much for listening, and question, comment are welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tam. I know it is rushed. I have pushed everyone to really use very short time, but I think the idea is to actually get a good sample of what is Buddhist heritage across different countries and how that can be used for tourism. So this was the presentation from Vietnam. We move to Professor Kam Hong from Hong Kong. Professor Tam, can you stop sharing the screen?
Yeah.
Please?
I will share now. I'll stop now. Oh. Thank you.
Can you see my screen?
All good.
Yes.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you very much for having me. So my name is Cam. I'm from the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. So it's about 9 o'clock now. So I will make it short because it's close to my bedtime. I'm getting sleepy, but I think 15 minutes is good enough. I'll just do some brief introduction on the background of the Buddhism in China, as well as some of my research in this area. So Buddhism in China, same as many other countries and regions, it has a very long history, can be traced back to 2000 years. It's one of the most widely followed religion in China. It's about 18% of Chinese believe in Buddhism. So you may think this percentage is not much, but actually it's quite large, because more than half of the Chinese actually do not have a religion. So as you can imagine, some people say, half of the world's Buddhist followers are Chinese because of the larger population base. So there are a lot of resources and heritage in mainland China, as well as in Hong Kong and other areas in the greater China. More than 33,000 shrines and temples can be found in our living environments. And there is an association related to Buddhism in China, which is the Buddhist Association of China, because Buddhism is widely recognized religion in China. So there are many Buddhism festivals in China. I list some of them here, but I will not introduce each of them. I think some of them are very similar across different countries and regions. So there are 4 major Buddhism mountains can be found in China. Those 4 mountains are very famous across the nation. Even though many Chinese have never been there, actually they've definitely heard about all those 4 mountains, because of the reputation of the mountains and the widely visibility of those mountains in social media and also Chinese novels. And those 4 mountains are Mount Ermei in Sichuan province, Mount Jiuhua in Anhui province, Mount Wutai in Shanxi province and Mount Putuo in Zhejiang province. As you can see, all those temples are located in very beautiful mountain on the top of the mountains and has very nice sceneries. So those are actually very popular Buddhism themed attractions for many travelers. So the popularity of those mountains can be reviewed by the number of visitors to those places, as what we can see in the figure. From 2007 to 2016, the number of visitors keep increasing, which means that many Chinese, most of them are Chinese actually. So those 4 mountains are really popular among the Chinese nationals. So I will be introducing 3 projects which are related to Buddhism in China, and 2 of them are about Shaolin Temple. And those projects are done in about 10 years ago, but I think the results are still applicable now. How many of you have heard about Shaolin Temple? I think many of you have heard about Shaolin Temple. It's really famous probably because of the movies. Many of you have seen it from the movie. And there is a very famous movie. The name itself is a Shaolin Temple. It's in Chinese. It was shot in 1980s. And it was really popular among Chinese. So since the introduction of the movie, a lot of Chinese are crazy about Shaolin Kung Fu. So there are some new movies introduced to the big screen later on, and many of them are broadcast in English. So actually, Chinese Kung Fu is fascinated by not only Chinese, but also foreigners, in different countries. So Shaolin Temple became very famous after the introduction of the movie, especially. It is located in Dongfeng City in Henan province. It has a history spanning over 1,500 years. It's one of the most famous Buddhist temples in the world. Because of its popularity, it draws a lot of attention from not only Chinese, but also the international visitors to the temple. So when you are there, you probably will sense the commercialization in this Shaolin Temple. There are a lot of visitors, and you can see, you can sense the crowding problem in the Shaolin Temple. So that caused some concern because it is a holy place for practicing Buddhism, but at the same time, it's open for tourism business. So how can we strive the balance between those 2 objectives? That's the issue leading to our project. So we started to investigate 2 topics. One is about how Shaolin Temple is being represented by different organizations in the tourism development. And the second is to understand the multiple meanings of the Shaolin Temple in tourism development among the Chinese people. So for the first objective, we initiate the project and conduct participant observation and interviews. So for participant observation, myself and my research assistant visit the temple by joining a local tour, just to get a sense on how the temple is being introduced to the tourists. And then we interviewed the 16 informants from different entities, including travel agents, hotels, tourism office, and the temples. So we visit around and climb the mountain of the temple, and then interview the monks, tourism officials, and many others, just to understand how the temple is being represented in different, social media, the government websites, and in the leaflets and other materials. So for the second project, which is to understand the different meanings of Shaolin Temple in the tourism developments among the Chinese, we want to look at the issue from Chinese point of view, how they want the temple to be represented in the tourism developments. So we conducted 7 focus groups with 58 tourism or hospitality practitioners and educators, so that we can get some understanding on the different meanings of Shaolin in the eyes of Chinese. So in the first project, what we find is that Shaolin is largely represented by Chinese Kung Fu, because Shaolin is so famous in the big screen. It's mainly represented by the Kung Fu in the big screen. So a lot of visitors actually just want to see Kung Fu when they visit Shaolin. They feel like Kung Fu is part of the culture of Shaolin and it's a must-see attraction in Shaolin. And Kung Fu indeed is being displayed and demonstrated in Shaolin by a performance. And the performers look like monks. Actually, they are not. They are performers. So and the audience actually just enjoying very much of the Kung Fu performance. Of course, they also take the tours, but mainly it's about the introduction of the history of Shaolin rather than the introduction of the religion, which is Buddhism in Shaolin. So for the second project, we try to identify the meanings of Shaolin to Chinese. So how would the Chinese want the Shaolin to be represented? Actually, they regard Kung Fu as part of Shaolin culture, and definitely it's part of the representation. But other than Kung Fu, they also want Shaolin to be represented as a religious site, as well as Chinese culture. So a lot of Chinese feel like Shaolin is part of their culture because it's so famous. It's being described in many different medias, including the famous Chinese novels. So they feel like it's part of the Chinese history and Chinese culture. So they want it to be represented as part of Chinese culture as well. And definitely Shaolin is one of the most famous religious sites. So they want the religious heritage to be represented in the Shaolin tourism as well. So that's our brief funding from those 2 projects. Of course, there are a lot of details. If you are interested in knowing more, you can contact me later on. I can share more information. So the last project about Buddhism is to investigate the expectations of travelers toward the Buddhism-themed hotels. So over the last 20 years, actually, there are a lot of interest in the tourism, in the hotel developers to develop Buddhism-themed hotels. So the target is not Buddhism believers. Their target is those travelers who are interested in understanding Buddhism or knowing more about Buddhism. Just like me, I'm not like Buddhist, but I enjoy seeing the different attractions, knowing the history of Buddhism in different religious sites. So there are many people like me, and they are the target of the hotels as customers. So this project is mainly to understand Buddhism motivated travelers' expectations of Buddhism themed hotel. So when they want to check into the Buddhism themed hotel, what do they expect to get? So that's the major research purpose of this study. And not only from travelers' perspective, we also want to understand how service providers perceive those expectations and whether their expectation is different from travelers' expectations. So in other words, we want to identify the gap between those 2 groups' views on travelers' expectations. So we conduct interviews with the qualified travelers in order to generate the expectation items for survey. So in the first stage of study, we conduct several interviews, and we actually derived 98 expectation items of travelers to the Buddhism themed hotels. And then we developed the questionnaire and then distribute the questionnaire to understand, to quantify the data and do the comparison. So let me just introduce the results to you. On the left, actually we have 98 expectation items. So I didn't display all of them. I only displayed the top 10 expectation items from travelers' point of view. So as you can see, I have the main score here, and also the ranking correspond to the main score of each expectation item. So those are the top 10 expectation items from travelers' point of view. And on the right side, you can see the main score of service providers, and also the ranking of service providers on those corresponding expectation items. So if you do the rough comparison, you can see the ranking is different, right, across those two groups. So to visualize those rankings, I put it on a spider web just to make it easier to see the differences. So the inner line, which is represented by the solid line, are the rankings of the travelers on the top 10 expectation items. And the outer line is the service providers' rankings on those expectation items, the same expectation items rendered by the travelers, right? So as you can see, there is a big gap between those two groups, which means that what we think travelers like may not be what they really like. So we really need to understand travelers' point of view when we develop the Buddhism themed hotel, so that we can provide better facilities and also services to them. Because every Buddhism themed hotel is a major investment. So we want to make it success. And that's why we need to understand travelers' expectation before we really put all those hotels into action or service. So at the end, I want to summarize how we can achieve the religious hospitality experience. We have to integrate not only the hotel hardware and software with the Buddhism culture, but we also need to attend travelers' basic needs. So if we go back to the top 10 list, you can see what ranks on the top is good privacy protection. On the third is provide meticulous service. On the fourth is comfortable guest room design. And those are not related to Buddhism at all. Those are care to the needs of the customers' basic needs, like during travel, right? So when we develop the Buddhism themed hotel, we have to think about not only the Buddhism culture to be integrated into the hotel design services, but also how we can care their basic needs during travel and put them as a priority. So that's why I put travelers' needs as well in developing or constructing the religious hospitality experience. So these are my brief sharing of my projects. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Hang. It is quite interesting to see the diversity that we are covering today in Buddhist heritage. I don't know why. Can we now go to our last but not least speaker? Join, a dear friend and almost the Far East. So we are over to the entertaining presentation, Jayan.
So.
Awaken them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can you see my PowerPoint now? Yeah. Thank you so much for the kind invitation, Kiran and Institute of Tourism. I'm so honored to be here today. It was extremely interesting to listen to all of you. It's from all different angles and backgrounds. It's been really, really inspiring. I work at Glasgow Caledonian University in Scotland. And I'm originally from South Korea. But surprise, surprise, we have a really big
Buddhist pilgrimage site in Scotland. So even though I live in Lucan, I live very, very close to a Buddhist temple. So that's something I like to explore in the future. So when you hear South Korea as a destination, what comes to your mind first? Squid Game? Gangnam Style?
K-pop.
K-pop, right? BTS.
BTS. Yeah.
Thank you, Kiran. You're very willing. So South Korea seems like really fun, entertaining destination to visit. So it's kind of exciting place to imagine as, but I have to disappoint you. In fact, South Korea is quite a difficult country to live and work. If you see the statistics, we have one of the highest suicide rates among OECD countries. And if you work in South Korea, on average, you take only 8 days as annual leave per year. This is per year. So imagine you have to work for the rest of the year, but you have only 8 days off. And but for the fact, I know from my brother and sister and friends, they actually don't take 8 days per year off. They just take 3-4 days off. So this is really average. So people work really long hours, long days for the year. And it's a very, in a way, stressful society. It's not all about, Gangnam Style and Blackpink. And there's this hyper competition people have to live with. So stress is a big issue in South Korea. And mental health, of course, mental well-being is a huge issue for young people and also older people too. And just very depressing to share, but suicide rate for people over 70 years old, it's becoming really, really high. So this has been a kind of new trend. People want to cope with this stress and anxiety and this hyper competition. So this is kind of a new fad. I don't know if you read this article about hitting Hmong. Hmong is like a mindfulness, thinking about nothing in Korean language. So there are new cafes in South Korea. They don't have Wi-Fi. You cannot use your phone. They don't have any signals. You cannot actually bring your phones. But you sit in this cafe and there are always trees outside and you just look at the trees for hours. And that's been a kind of a coping strategy and leisure trend in South Korea for young people. And also, if you look at the other picture, there's a kind of event trend. There's a mindfulness event in South Korea in public park. So you go to this park, sit for hours as a kind of competition. So who sits longest without doing anything? Again, you cannot use your phone. You just have to sit and do nothing. And that's been kind of a coping strategy and event in South Korea, but it's very interesting though. So who's the winner? Can you imagine who can be the winner of the mindfulness competition? Actually, there are medical doctors walk around and measure your heartbeats. So whoever who has the slowest heartbeats is the winner. So also interesting mindfulness events become a competition. So that kind of captures the competitive South Korean culture, if I can mention. And actually, I have to show the full part. Oh, and with this fad and trend, young Korean people go to Buddhist temples for temple stays and temple food cooking classes more, again, as a kind of a coping strategy. And I framed as a wellness tourism trend. So instead of religious tourism or spiritual tourism, I think Korean people see going to temples and staying for a few days as a more like a wellness tourism. And obviously, Kiran shared the statistics earlier. Thank you so much. About 30% of South Koreans are Buddhist. But for the fact we were a Buddhist country for 1700 years in the past, but more people go to church now. But even Buddhist people in South Korea, like Brooke and Professor Kam and Professor Tam shared, people don't necessarily meditate or do mindfulness practices or go to temples. I don't know actually being Buddhist, what that means in South Korea. I grew up in a Buddhist family, but we would go to temple once a year on a Buddha's birthday, and we donate lots of money and pray for our health and wealth and success in career. So like Brooke touched on the protection and the magic. But anyways, this is a kind of a new trend that non-Buddhist or kind of Buddhist South Koreans go to Buddhist temples and again cope with the stress and use this as a wellness outlet and mechanism. So they go in the nature walks and tea ceremonies. And often Buddhist temples are in rural areas, so they take advantage of the natural settings. And there's no actually exact statistics in South Korea about how many temples we have. Some people say there are 1,000 temples, but some people say there are 3,000 temples. So registered, not registered, traditional temples and new temples. I think there's around 3,000 temples in South Korea. Surprise, surprise, right? I don't think people see South Korea as a Buddhist or spiritual religious destination, but there are quite a lot of Buddhist temples. And it's very interesting to see this whole new trend. Young people go to Buddhist temples and stay for a few days and practice all this, because it was quite forgotten for many decades that we have this heritage. With this modernization, we have neglected this heritage, but I think it's coming back with this wellness trend. And actually, because of COVID also, people needed some coping mechanism, and we realized, oh, we have these temples actually, and there's so many programs and they're cooking classes. So people started going more. So in a way, COVID kind of accelerated people to be interested in Buddhist heritage and culture more. And food is also interesting aspect. Even though we were Buddhist country and kind of temples are everywhere, people are not really engaging meditation or learning about Buddhism or Buddhist teachings. So it's a kind of intimidating to go to Buddhist temple and do meditation. But kind of food is easy subject, or cooking class is kind of an easy activity to go to Buddhist temple too. So I think food cooking classes attracted young people who are not really aware of Buddhist culture and heritage to the temples. So more and more young people go to Buddhist temples, not for meditation, not for mindfulness or magic or Buddhist teachings, but actually food. And they want to just learn what kind of Buddhist food are out there, how to cook. So when they go home, they can keep the healthy cooking or diet lifestyle. So that's a kind of an attraction for young people to go to temples. So the Buddhist cooking classes has been very, very popular, again, during COVID period, and it kind of sustains even in the post-COVID period, but we are not really in the post-COVID period. So anyways, so that has been quite popular and very also interesting why Buddhist food has been popular. And there are many reasons, because people are more conscious with food and well-being and wellness, but also there was a kind of a superstar monk who showed Korean Buddhist temple cooking on Netflix show called Chef's Table. I don't know if you are aware of this, but because of this, of course, the international audience has been more kind of interested in Korean Buddhist temple food suddenly, but also interested in Korean people watching this show, watching these foreigners interested in Korean Buddhist temple food, made us also aware of, oh, we have this cool heritage going on and we have Buddhist food. And they kind of made Korean people also interested in Buddhist food and cooking method and ingredients. And like this monk Chongguan said, I'm cooking for the mind, cooking food for the mind. So cooking, Buddhist food cooking is not really normal cooking, but it's also part of the mindfulness ritual in South Korean Buddhist culture. I don't know about other Buddhist cultures, but going to the temple, picking up vegetables together and prepare the ingredients and food together and learn about the benefits of each herbs and vegetables. and eat together quietly and washing the dishes and the kitchen and table all together. That's kind of as a mindfulness practice. So if you do this, actually it is mindfulness practice, but again, it's not intimidating. You're going to temple to meditate, because meditate for 3 days, staying in a temple, it's again sounds very difficult for non-Buddhist people or Buddhist people who haven't practiced. So again, food and cooking, or this cooking as a mindfulness ritual, has been attraction to for young people to go to Buddhist temples. And it's in Korean language called Barugongyang. In our history, it is one of mindfulness practice. So you don't have to sit and meditate with the, by the book, but doing all these practice of activities is actually mindfulness practice. And somehow Korean temple food has been very popular in Western media, and there are so many books and shows, and we now provide so many programs in English. So temples are hiring more English spoken volunteers. And also this is very interesting that there is no one Korean temple food type. If you go to all these different provinces, the temples in different provinces have a different kind of a Buddhist temple food. So people start traveling different provinces and regions for experiencing different Buddhist food and cooking method. And also we have very distinct 4 seasons. So people go to certain temples for springtime food, summer, autumn, winter. So there is kind of a trend, young people follow these 4 seasons for different type of food, different type of herbs and medicinal vegetables, which is also interesting. So I like to emphasize that how these Buddhist cooking classes and rituals and programs are good for South Koreans' well-being and wellness, mental well-being, but also this has been beneficial for local communities, that this amount of tourists come to this rural, remote, some deprived areas for just temple food and cooking and visiting. And again, different regions, different seasons attract, quite good number of tourists. So this is also quite beneficial for the rural areas. And also this contribute to the awareness of sustainable consumptions and sustainable culture and food. And it's still very marginalized area on Buddhist temple tourism, but there has been a little bit of a trend. More researchers are interested in temple food or religious food tourism. So there's some recent research there, couple published during during COVID time. So I'm almost here at the conclusions. So I like to emphasize how Buddhist temple food tourism in Korea has been popular as a wellness practice and wellness intervention for stressed out South Koreans, especially young people, and they provide a venue for physical health improvement, also mental and spiritual health improvement. And while doing this, people can gain different perspectives about life. It's not about winning and competing and going up there, but kind of give them some space to slow down and see different things in life. Yet there are not many diversified or creative cooking classes or programs in temples. So maybe local authorities and small business owners and temple leaders or administrators get together and develop more creative or sustained these visitor programs. Maybe, I don't know, maybe developing Buddhist pilgrimage routes for linking these different provinces, or just developing some applications for mobile users. So they're just lacking with diversified programs at the moment. So if you go to South Korea, you want to go to all these temples for food and cooking, it's a little bit challenging to find this information. So that has to be definitely enhanced in the future. And also, again, these programs, if developed properly, it can benefit the rural communities that don't have diversified income sources. Again, the temples are in South Korea often located in countryside that don't have much many income sources and employment opportunities. And again, in many ways, Buddhist temples or Buddhist monks or Buddhist food had been forgotten in South Korea with all this development and modernization. But this is kind of coming back as a wellness intervention. So now people are realizing or reappreciating what we have right now. So I think these Buddhist cooking or temple stay programs and tourism programs are really positive for the heritage protection and revitalization. But for the existing research right now are very much on marketing, consumer experience, and consumer satisfaction and branding aspects for destinations. But I think there should be more research on what does this really do to people, especially for myself, how these temple stay programs or these cooking and eating rituals really help people to slow down and really beneficial for their mental health or spiritual health. That research should be done beyond just marketing and branding and product development, and also impact for rural communities and destinations. And that will be it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jane, for taking time. I know it's very hard being the last speaker to do this, but I guess all of us in this virtual room, can we all use our virtual claps and just say, thank you for a fantastic session. Everyone brought in a different aspect of Buddhist heritage and how that's connected with tourism. I'm not going to speak much because we've all spoken. We'll keep the floor open, but can I request Talib, if you want to say something about today's session, and then we open it out for comments?
So much. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I have to leave soon, but I would like to say a few words here. You know, I always believe that Buddhism is a very important element in tourism. Tourism means that when you go to a place, you don't go there to change the people. People must change you. You must be adaptable to whatever changes. And Buddhism is a very typical example of that. So I believe that tourism and Buddhism are very much going along with each other. I appreciate it very much. The last presentation, Korean presentation on food and tourism. Of course, that's a very important aspect. I've listened very carefully to all what was done. Sri Lanka, Thailand, and China, Vietnam. I've visited all these countries, and I know how important Buddhism is. So I want to thank you all, especially you, Rida, and Kiran, for holding this meeting. It's a very important meeting. It's a meeting that proves what I say is right, which is you don't go to places to change the people. You go there to change yourself, because you go there to learn from the people what they have. And just being here, I learned so much, really, without having to leave my country. Now, thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you, Kiran.
Thank you. Thank you, Talib. Floor is open. If you've got any comments, feedbacks, questions for us, we'll be here for another 15 minutes. I know, Professor Kam, you need to go to sleep. I also need to go to sleep. In 15 minutes, it'll be midnight for me. But we will take some questions because of the interest that people have. Any questions, feedback, comments, reflections?
I would have a question, please.
Yes, please.
Thank you. From a European perspective, and probably also from a Western perspective, it was very interesting, and I'd like, first of all, to thank all of you for the presentations, and I'd like also to thank Professor Kiran Shinde for sharing it on LinkedIn, so I could also attend. My question is about how do you deal with the notion of heritage in Buddhism, also from a religious point of view? How do you deal with this practically so Western, probably also capitalist notion, which comes from big organizations like, for example, UNESCO? How do you translate or appropriate this notion? Thank you. The question is for those who would like to answer me. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone would like to take that question? Okay. Talib.
Okay. I think heritage is a very important element here because we're talking about Buddhism. Buddhism is a way of life now. It's heritage, really, in all its aspects. And UNESCO recognizes it as heritage. So I think that what the lady from Italy asked about is very, very important here. I think that heritage and culture are very essential to tourism and are very essential to Buddhism as well. Buddhism and tourism go together. UNESCO have recognized this as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Anyone else would like to respond?
Can I say something? Yes.
Absolutely.
I'd just like to add to Talib's comment, and that links to the other presenters. Actually, it fascinated me to see the spectrum. And I think the point made with heritage, what we're looking for specifically and now after COVID, and the trend with wellness tourism, is that different lifestyle that is associated with the heritage of Buddhism, the peace, the inner peace that people try to derive, whether that is through consumption of food, preparation of food, whether to go to the destination where they feel just looking at a monument, or being in the natural environment where a lot of those particular monasteries and so forth are located. They all provide a sense of peace. And I think that's where the attraction is. And that's why wellness tourism grabs so nicely onto the Buddhist tourism from my perspective of special interest tourism. Just a little comment. So thank you for that last point, Talib. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thanks. Probably if you go back to what Professor Tam was saying, and she was kind of almost nicely laid out how Buddhist tourism, and for that matter, any kind of religious tourism, if done properly, has enormous amount of heritage that can be then combined with different forms of tourism. So you don't have to be religious to understand that, or you don't have to be active practitioner of religion. You can actually pick up parts of that heritage and modify it, adapt it to your own needs of tourism. And that's really what makes Buddhism so much fascinating, that it is not so rigid, unlike some of the other religious practices. It lends itself to teaching and philosophizing rather than ritualizing. I think that's a big difference between how we look at Buddhism, and therefore the spectrum of heritage that we see across. And that's the reason why we had this sample. It was very judiciously selected to see the spectrum that we were there, because we want to go beyond the notion of monumental heritage. All the time we talk about, when we talk of religion, we talk of major places of worship, but the idea here was to actually spread that out and be able to see how heritage can be a useful resource, not only for tourists, but also for the practicing people. It can become a very good source of employment, good source of sustainability, good source of embedding into the community, rather than the niche, rather than what we call the enclave tourism. So I think there's a lot of value in that heritage aspect of Buddhism that is important for tourism, and therefore we should all be really looking forward to that as a means of promoting.
I would like to make a comment that too. It's the intangible aspects, isn't it? That is really the attraction there. And when I looked at some of the data that was presented there and comparing, for instance, the industry perspective versus the traveler's perspective, where the focus lies, the providers are very much driven by the tangibles,
Yeah.
You know, what we are provided in experience, which is the intangibles. But the tourist industry still talks about product development. They do not talk about experience engineering or design. It's a completely different approach. And what we are talking about here is very much an experience design, if nothing else. Yes, that's just a
Thanks.
comment.
Yes, Bridget. Right.
All right. I guess in the interest of our sleeps, we will say goodbye. For all those who have woken up, have a wonderful day. But if you've got any questions, please reach out to us either through Institute of Tourism website or through our own emails, and we'll be more than happy to take these conversations forward. Thank you so much. Good
Thank
night
you
from
so
my
much,
side.
Kiran. It was
Thank you.
wonderful.
Thank
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah, as good host, I will just still stay till everyone is gone.
Thank you so much,
That's
Kiran.
so sad.
It was really amazing. Thank you.
I hope we've
From-
done the justice to this topic. That's more important.
No, yeah.
And there's so much that we can talk about. I mean, when we were doing this project on UNWTO, and I must say, if UNWTO didn't give this project, we might not have even looked at this kind of spectrum. I mean, I was surprised and super impressed by the diversity as we were talking to scholars from Korea, China, Japan, and how they look at Buddhist tourism. And that was completely different from how we look at Buddhist tourism in India, in Sri Lanka.
Kiran, but you organized really well with all these representations. Really, really well organized. Thumbs up.
Thank you.
Was
Thank you.
really
Thank
good.
you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your hard work. Thank you. From tomorrow, the recording will be available forever, including the biography of the speakers. Thank you so much, Kiran. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, take care. Bye.
Bye.
Nice meeting you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Korea.